I want to welcome you to the Charly Crawford podcast. Let's ride.
This episode is brought to you by Crossfire Trailer Service in Stephenville, Texas. If you haul horses or livestock, you already know when a trailer goes down, everything stops. Crossfire takes trailer safety seriously. Every trailer gets a free safety inspection with pictures and videos sent straight to your phone. They get it. Nobody wants their trailer sit in a shop for weeks over routine maintenance. They offer same-day bearing service, and they stand behind their work. They're big supporters of the rodeo and Western industry, backing athletes and events all over the area. Next time you're in Stephenville and need trailer work, call and schedule an appointment or just stop into Crossfire Trailer Service. If you tell them I sent you, they'll knock $50 off any preventative maintenance service. Hey, Mr. Ote, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
You bet. I appreciate you coming on. You've been a hero of mine ever since I was little, and you know your history of just being the gamer of the 10th round and always coming in clutch was just something that every kid, no matter what event he was in, we always wanted to be able to game like Ote Berry at the end, and like you always did. And so, love to be able to talk about how it was rodeoing back then, who you all kind of fought it out with, and what the culture was like. And it was just such a steer wrestling too has always been one of my favorite events because it's men amongst men, and how y'all handle your business amongst each other, and then how y'all get along is something that I think is something that every event could kind of go by. There's a certain code amongst you guys, and so I love having the steer wrestlers on. So I appreciate you coming on.
You bet. And yeah, we was, and I think they still are a tight knit group. I'm not sure if they're as close as we were back in the day, but I don't know why. It wasn't like I started that or my generation because it was before me, and we fell in there, and it's like you kind of live just kind of the code of the West. What's right's right and wrong's wrong, and you stand together for what you believe in, and I think the steer wrestlers were. Kind of legendary when it comes to that. And for an example, when they were having a meeting at Colorado Springs one year, and on the agenda was maybe voting whether to make calf roping a mandatory or voluntary, I guess. And the calf ropers came to Roy Duval, who I happened to be traveling with, and he was always kind of the one that everybody looked up to, and told them what was going on, and we shut the slack down at Colorado Springs, and looked like a caravan going up to the headquarters up there, and barged in the meeting and basically put an end to it. Said, we're not it's not even up for discussion. It's we're all for one for all, and this is the way it's going to be, and there was no vote on it.
Yeah, steer wrestlers it's almost like I think of three different elements to steer wrestling. One is you guys are almost as a team, almost like a team sport, like football. And
Yeah.
then there's a code of the cowboy that y'all have as well, but then also a brotherhood, and have that camaraderie almost like in the military. There's something about you guys that stick up for what's right and not scared to go bust down doors.
Right. And like I said, I'm not sure where it all started, but I know the Duval family, and especially Roy and Bill in particular, were you know everybody looked up to Roy. He was by far the man, and in my opinion, the greatest that's ever been. To make the finals 24 times and three world championships, and everybody looked up and respected him, and just kind of when something would come around or come up, everybody looked to him, and they cherished his opinion, and he told it how it was, and simplified things, and that's kind of I think how it kind of went, and we all just abided kind of by that, and I think that's what made us so close.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait to talk about your career. It looked like in 1980 is kind of when it started. It looked like in the steer wrestling title of winning the National High School Rodeo Association, and then on to make your first NFR in 1985, where you won the average and your first world title. First of four, 1985, 1990, 91, and 1995. and looked like 95 was after a back injury, so that was a heck of a comeback. And then, in 2016, inducted to the Pro Rodeo Hall of Fame. So, man, that's such a legendary career. But I love the 20 go round wins and 7 of them being in that 10th round when all the pressure's there. And that's something I think that out of everything is what so many people would love to understand would be how in the world were you able to find that nerves and adrenaline and all the things that come on that 10th round and then use it to be able to have that peak performance like everyone dreams of. It was cool to watch, because I've been going down YouTube and watching all of your runs from everything that's been posted, and what I loved about your career too was your signature finish. When you would get the nose, and man, when them steers hit the ground, your upper body strength and your signature move where you were all the way over the top, like just a headlock where once you had the nose, there was no getting out. And just the strength, the athleticism, and the fact of how good you could ride your horses, and it looks like it had some great horses along the way as well. So it was fun to watch and see the steer wrestling back then, because those were steers that they didn't always fall the right way as probably as much as they prep them now. I don't think they were as prepped as what they were. They weren't as prepped like they were back then, right? They weren't
Right.
prepped like they are now. Is that correct?
Yeah, we run a lot of fresh cattle. We even run fresh cattle in the Thomas and Mack one year,
I thought I seen.
where, where now, gosh, those cattle have been run. They've had, you know, lots of runs on them, patterns on them, and probably that's what you need in that building, as small as it is. It's pretty tricky running fresh cattle in a building that small. But going back to some of the things you said, and I'm sitting here thinking, there's a lot of defining moments, I guess, in your career, and it's not one certain thing. It's a number of things, but one thing that I thought of when you were saying that about when I got the nose and finished, I threw a steer at a high school rodeo one year, and I thought threw him down, thought I had a flag coming, should have won the steer wrestling, and steer hit with a leg under him, and I didn't know it, and got up and started walking away, and the flagman still had the flag up, and my dad was pretty tough on us, which I credit him with a lot of my success because he was so hard on us and growing up, and the reaming I got after that high school rodeo. Uh, so every steer I threw after that, I tried to make them roll all the way over, so there was no doubt. Instead of just hitting, I'd crank on that nose, and if I knew that steer rolled all the way over, that he didn't have a leg under him, and just a lot of life experiences, I guess, like that led up to that, and just one of the many lessons I learned with the side of my dad's foot in my backside, for not throwing him right the first time.
Yeah, that's one of them. Never again.
Right.
Never again
Right.
will that happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so did you got started up there in South Dakota? Is that where you were born? Was from up there?
Yeah, I was born and raised on a ranch in South Dakota, and we grew up basically horseback. I was the youngest of 6 kids. I got 2 older brothers and 3 older sisters, and my dad was kind of a circuit rodeo. He rode broncs in his younger days and then steer wrestled, and we just grew up going to rodeos, either watching him when we were real little, and then as we got, had horses of our own, of course, and, the same horses we went to town and roped or steer wrestled on, same ones we rode in the pasture at home and drug calves to the Brandon Fire. And, you know, uh, horses were broke back then, and it was easy for a horse to go to the arena and perform for just a few minutes rather than, being rode from daylight to dark out on the ranch. And so, I think horses, in my opinion, were better and tougher back in those days just because of that, but maybe not as fast as and refined as some of them are now. But anyway, that's kind of where it started, and then we all just followed in his footsteps. Basically, we all, I've had sisters that was pretty good hands. My middle sister Roxanne was a state high school barrel racing champ for 2 years in a row, like her junior and senior year, and my brother Wade was all around and team roping champ, and he rode rough stock, and I mean, we wanted to do it all. It wasn't one specialized event, but I tried bareback riding, tried the rough stock, and didn't have much success. And soon learned that the timed events was more suited to myself. But we all grew up roping. Just you had to rope if you was on a ranch. It was a necessity. And I loved the roping. I still love to rope, but just the steer wrestling kind of seemed to be my event that I maybe excelled a little more at, and I thought I could do it all, and probably should have worked harder at some of the other events, but when I went to having success in that, and it just kind of took over.
Now, when did the name Oat come about? Because if I remembered right and read right, your original name was Scott. Is that correct?
Yeah, my real name, my given name is Scott. Oat come along. I guess me being the youngest of the six kids when I was a toddler learning to walk. My brothers and sisters call me Otis from the character on the Andy Griffith Show. It looked like I was the town drunk, I guess, when I was learning to walk, and Otis got shortened to Oat somewhat all along the way there.
Did I hear right? Did you say went side to side more than you went front to back?
Yeah, I think so. They said that kind of looked like him coming in after a bender, and checking himself into jail. So, yeah, that's how
well,
it got
coming
started.
well, coming up from ranching and roping, when did steer wrestling become the passion?
Well, like I said, my dad rode broncs early. I never did see my dad ride broncs, but I did see him steer wrestle, when I was a kid, and that was kind of his event that he gravitated to, I guess, and probably had more knowledge in that event than the others, and he taught my older brothers and myself, and he had went and stayed with Benny Reynolds when he was young, and went to one of Benny's schools, and he just loved that event. He loved the steer wrestling, and Benny helped him some, and my dad used to love just to watch guys like Harley May and John W. Senior, and my dad never did go hard, but he'd circuit rodeo, and of course, a lot of them guys would come to the circuit rodeos in the summer. Like the bigger rodeos back then were Deadwood and Belfouche over the 4th of July, and some of them, and he got to see a lot of those guys, and of course, when we were little, we got the sports news, and when my dad got done reading it, us kids went through it, and I wasn't even able to read, but we went and looked at every picture, and I knew every not just steer wrestling, but, and Larry Mahan was a hero of mine, and the rough stock guys back at the time, Phil Line, and just we was so into rodeo, we lived out in the middle of nowhere in South Dakota, and to get to see stuff like that, and then actually get to see those guys in the summertime at some of those rodeos, and go watch them and get their autograph, and it was very cool growing up like that.
So it looked like steer wrestling, you started getting good at that through high school, winning the high school finals in 1980. And then when did you get your card and start rodeoing?
I got my permit right, like, when I was in high school, and started going to some circuit rodeos, and kinda going back to the high school deal, and it's a long learning process, kinda like I told you about when I threw the steer and didn't have a flag coming. So my oldest brother, Wade, was a two-time national high school qualifier. My middle sister, Roxanne, was a two-time national high school qualifier at the finals, and I was kinda like those 2, more like those 2 than the other 3, and I've got 2 other sisters and a brother that rodeoed and won stuff and was accomplished, but maybe not quite as it was like I always thought that, Wade and Roxanne and myself, we kinda took after my dad, and the other 3 took after my mother, and I just assumed that I was gonna make the high school finals my junior and senior year because, hey, they did, and well, I missed it by just a point or 2, and I wound up 5th my junior year, and I never forget coming home from that high school finals and being in my room that night and just the frustration and I was angry and I was feeling sorry for myself and mad because I didn't achieve my goal and I was fighting back the tears in my eyes and gritting my teeth, and I told myself, "Okay, I didn't face reality, I didn't make it. It's not just because of I'm like them. They're just, I'm gonna, you still have to go out and earn everything. And so I made myself a promise that night in that basement. I said, not only will I make it next year, but I'll win it. And I told myself that night, and that's when I first really believed in the power of positive thinking. And our dad had told us that a long time ago, and and told us about, self-help books and reading, and, your mind is so powerful. And if you put something, a thought in there, and just keep reassuring yourself about it, and, and then I did it. I made it the next year, and won 3rd at my state. Didn't win state, but, that wasn't my goal. My goal was to make it, and I did, and then got there, and then won the national high school finals. And it was so that kinda started on the path of knowing, hey, if you believe in something and work hard enough at it, that you can achieve it.
Was there some growth spurts along the way? Also, not only that, that I know that, when you're going through high school in the learning phase of it, especially I think a lot of it in the bulldogging too, because team roping is a little bit different. You can rope them sleds from when the time you're 4. And steer wrestling, the live action of getting off, there's got to be a certain size you got to kind of get to. Then once you do get that size, then it's reps. When it seems like too, when it really, I felt like the light bulbs going off was getting comfortable getting in the hole, and then when everything starts slowing down where you can see it. What were some of those steps you felt like? Because within 1 year not making it and the next year being the high school champion, there were some adjustments having to be
Yeah.
made, I would feel like.
Yeah, and kinda going back to when we learned, and my brothers included, uh, my dad we learned on steers that probably weighed 6.5, maybe 700. And yes, between my sophomore and junior year, I grew like 3.5 inches that summer. So I'm basically the same height as I am right now, and I think I weighed like 160 or 70 pounds. And so basically 120 pounds ago, that was me. So, uh, yeah, I was very tall, skinny, and I bulldogged for quite a while, practiced for a long time before I ever actually slid a steer, brought him around, and grabbed him by the nose and threw him in one motion. Most of the time, it was slide till you got to the back end of the arena, stop, put a full Nelson on him, and throw him down. And and my dad sitting there, riding beside you, and giving you instructions in a very loud voice, and a lot of
Want to make
descriptive
sure you can hear me.
a lot of descriptive adjectives in there telling you, and, but his theory was, "Hey, you get it to where you do it right on these cattle, and there's, the little ones, there's nothing to them." And so you learn technique first, and I really appreciated that as I got older and as I got the size. And, and everybody knows what great technique John W. had, and, junior and senior, but and same way with Steve Duhon. Steve and I weren't always this big. When we learned, we were younger, and you learn technique first, and wow, what a game changer if you have technique, and then when the size does come, it just makes it. I'm not ever going to say it was easy, but it makes it a lot simpler than it was when we were, you know, arms still that big around, and 150 pounds. So.
So, 1980, was that your senior year?
Yes, that was my senior year, and I was actually, pretty young for my grade. I was 16 when I started my senior year of high school, and 17 when I started college. I went to Eastern Wyoming College at Torrington. They gave me a scholarship to come rodeo for them, and, uh and yes, I got my permit, and had a lot of success on my permit in 1981 was my permit year, and won a lot of rodeos, and placed a lot. And it took $1,000 to fill your permit, and I don't remember exactly, but I win 6, 7, 8, $9,000, and thinking, this is going to be not a cakewalk, but easier. I mean, I fell right in and went to doing good. And instead of getting my card, I'm like, I want to wait for 1982, give myself a full year. And my goal was to win Rookie of the Year. And I tell this story a lot. So in late in 81, going to some of those fall rodeos and not realizing maybe that the cattle had gotten better and older and slowed down, wore out. Man, I watched, I'll never forget, we was at a rodeo and I seen Dave Brock make a run, was 3-0. Just, I mean, caught a steer and when he caught him, he didn't slide maybe 2 inches. I mean, like when his feet hit, he jerked that steer through himself and through him and like, wow, that's the fastest I've ever. And I seen him and another guy or two do that. And I went home and I told my brother that, "Hey, we're doing it wrong." You know, our dad taught us slide and, and that just these guys are catching their feet hitting and they're just throwing these steers so fast and he's like, "Well, show me. I'm not sure." So we saddle up and go to the practice pen and me being, hard headed and, that's kind of another trait of us steer wrestlers, I guess. And I'm going to change my style. I'm going to, my feet hit, I'm going to try to throw this steer. Well, tall and skinny and lanky, and needless to say, it didn't suit me well. But I was bound, determined. By golly, that's the way I was going to change my style. And so I tell the story. In 1982 was my rookie year, and I think Doug Houston might have been the rookie of the year that year. It maybe took 25 or 6,000, I'm not sure, right in there somewhere to win the rookie. And I tell him I was just 25 or 6,000 short. I win zero my rookie year. Didn't place in one time, not a split fifth or sixth or I won $0 my rookie year. And so I went back home, broke. My mom helped me a little bit. She'd slide me a little money under the table, and not that we had any money or a family, they worked hard for everything they had, but she helped me with entry fees here and there once in a while. But I come home that fall and got a job and went to work and paid off my debts and put a little money together where I could rodeo a little bit in '83 and I got a job poisoning prairie dogs in South Dakota. And there was, I think, 16 of us living in a trailer house with no running water, and we'd stay up there and work as long as it didn't rain or snow, and land there with 15 or 16 other guys, for maybe sometimes a week before we'd get to go home or go somewhere where to shower, and you can imagine sleeping bags everywhere on the floors and the aroma of this place. And I run a lot of steers in my mind, and I went back and thought, maybe my dad wasn't as dumb as we made him out to be, and I need to go back and rethink, when I had success and how I feel my permit, how I won the high school finals, and it was his teachings and the way he showed us, and so I spent all fall in a camp like that with these guys, and Charlie, I didn't get on a horse from somewhere in August until New Year's Day. We went to a jackpot, but I'd worked all that fall and I had run 10 million steers in my mind. And I went to a four-head steer wrestling jackpot and I won the first 3 rounds and I won second the fourth round. And going back to doing what I knew how to do, how I was taught to do. Love Dave Brock and those guys, but hey, that style was for them. It didn't fit me, and and that was just another learning curve, to where, you know, hey, do it how you know how to do it. Don't let other people influence your say, So that was just another lesson that was hard learned, that I had to just kind of the deal, which I wasn't never going to take no for an answer. I always wanted to be a cowboy, and so whatever it took, go working in a camp or whatever to get enough money to go again, and then in 1983, Denver and some of those rodeos weren't limited back then, but they had a rule: you had to win $1 to enter them. So I hadn't won $1 in 1982, so I couldn't go to Denver or Fort Worth. I entered San Antonio and Houston and got in somehow. Just they didn't have really limits, but they didn't get as many entries as so my first rodeo is San Antonio, and going back to the story that, I went to Rapid City at the rodeo. It was the first one I could go to that winter rodeo, and, I threw a steer in 3/8. I'll never forget it. It's the first time I'd ever threw a steer in 3, and I won 7th, and,
Wow.
And
Wow. Back then. Wow.
and Rapid City's still a notorious small arena, kind of like the NFR, and old steers, and they won first, second, third on the same steer, and they win fourth, fifth, and sixth on another steer. I won seventh, and Bob Christopherson won eighth, and we was the only two that didn't have those two steers. So, and I was pretty pumped, to be three, and I was gonna go to San Antonio, and I caught a ride. I actually caught a ride with a guy that was hauling, had a load of microwave ovens, and he hauling them to Fort Worth, and I rode to Fort Worth with him, and, uh and, so I went to Fort Worth with him and got there, and he dropped me off at the airport. And I mean, like, the only airport I'd ever seen in my life was Rapid City, and, small, maybe 1, 2 gates, 3, and so we got to the entrance, and he said, "Well, here it says airport to exit." So I get out, and I walk like, how big DFW airport is. I walk forever with a bag with pretty much everything I own in it, and I finally get up there, and then I got on an airplane, and first time I'd ever been in an airplane, scared to death, and I flew from Fort Worth to San Antonio, and yeah, it was pretty wild.
So did you say your first couple of years rodeo, and you said you didn't even have a vehicle or a rig? Was that right?
Right, and,
So
I
you just hitchhiked, got in, made it work. You got to the
once
next one.
once I got to San Antonio, I knew I'd run into somebody maybe, what made it easier for me, Charlie, is my older brother Wade rodeoed for a few years, and he rode bareback horses and got really close to making NFR a couple times riding bareback horses, and he would come by the house, when I was a kid or still in high school or whatever, and had traveling partners and different ones. And so I knew more rough stock guys than I did time eventers. And I caught rides all over that winter with Brad Germanson, who's still a good friend of mine today, and some of the bareback riders, Rocky Kukla and Larry Peabody, some of those guys that my brother had rodeoed with or caught rides with, or they'd come by the house and stayed. And so, yeah, once I got there, I knew I'd know somebody, and I got to know a few more of the timed event guys, and back then the mount business was big, so there was always good horses, and we talked about, the Duvalls, who I wound up rodeoing with a long time in my career, and still live right down by with them and next to them, and Bill and Roy Duval always had good horses. Tommy Combs from Dakota there always had a good horse. Alfalfa Fedderson from, Oklahoma, and they wanted you to ride their horses. Mount business was a big deal back then. They wanted guys to get on. That's how they made their living, and so you could pull up, and once you got there to the rodeo, the problem was getting there, and once we got there, you could get on anything you wanted to,
So
and
once you started winning, did it get easier then
oh
to be
yeah, for
able
sure.
with the good guys letting you on?
Yeah, yeah, and even then, guys would let you on. Roy Duval tells this story when he was a kid. He went and asked a guy to ride his horse, and the guy turned him down, and it made him feel so bad that he vowed to himself then, "If I ever have a horse, I'll never turn anybody down." And Roy was like that, and to the point of, I asked him one time. I said, "Gosh, how could you put that many runs on a horse?" Like, Whiskey was one of the best horses he ever owned, and probably the toughest horse that's ever went out there. He had 64 runs on him one morning at Fort Worth in the slack. I mean, he just wouldn't tell anybody no, and so when you put 50, 60 runs in a slack one day on a horse, and 30 runs at Houston in the Astrodome, and, they match raced him one morning at Albuquerque on the track, and when they come back, they jerked the jockey saddle off and threw the bulldog saddle on. He had 20 some runs in the slack after match racing for a quarter of a mile. Just it was, but back then it was so much easier. And like I said, them guys, they made a living, and not only with what they won, but what their horse made them. And some of them guys made a lot more money with their horses than they won themselves.
Hi, I'm Trevor Brazil. My name's Corey Kuntz.
Hi, I'm Gino Nogueira.
I'm Luke Brown.
Hi, I'm Tyler Wade.
I'm Caleb Driggers.
Miles Baker.
Wesley Thorpe.
Paul Eves.
Patrick Smith.
We ask so much out of our horses that recovery is crucial, and that's why I use Equinety. I've been doing this a long time. What I have in common with these ropers is we all trust equinety.
I feed equinety because I want to give my horses any edge.
My horse, my horse, my horse, my horse, all my horses have the equinety edge.
When did the NFR start becoming the goal and realistic? Because you're talking about 82, 83, a couple years later. What did 84 look like? When was it that you
Well,
could tell, like, going into 85, this was the year?
So actually in 83, when I started out that winter, when I went to Rapid City and then I finally got to San Antonio and that spring I got to California, went to the spring rodeos out there, and that's when I met Harley May, who I'd heard about my whole life, and actually Harley let me stay with him at his, we practiced there at a little old place, and I'd stay in town with Harley, and I rodeoed with Tony Weiss and some of the older guys, and went through the California spring run, and then we went to Reno, and then I got out from them, and I wanted to go back and rodeo closer back to my home, but I'd up and down. It was like a roller coaster. I'd win a little bit, and then I'd be broke, and I'd think, "Gosh, I'm broke. I'm gonna have to go home and go back and get a job or work." And then about the time I was broke, I'd win a little bit, and then as it got later in the summer, with some of those rodeos, and especially the big ones, you have to enter them a couple 2-3 weeks out, or sometimes a month, and I went home. I was home at the 4th of July, went to some circuit rodeos like Belfouche and Crawford, Nebraska, and some of them, and I was kind of there at home, but I was entered in Calgary and maybe Napa and a few of those rodeos in Cheyenne, and I went home and I thought, "Gosh, I don't want to turn out of those, but I really don't have the money to go." And I went to the bank at Gordon, Nebraska, where I went to high school, and the banker was a good friend of mine, and he loaned me $1,500. I figured up, I think I could get through for about 3 weeks on 1,500, and to go to these rodeos. And then I called the guy that I'd worked for all through high school and in summer and putting up hay, a guy named Buck Buckles, who gave me a job and had a nice ranch out there and helped me learn a lot about cowboying and everything. So I had my job lined up. I go to Calgary, placed a little bit, and kind of picked at them a little. When I got to Cheyenne, I was about 100 or $150 short. Of my 1,500 was gone, and I don't remember who I got to spot me 100 or two or help me, but I get my entry fees paid at Cheyenne, and I won the second round, and the short round I won the average at Cheyenne, and it was I still got my number. I think actually it's in at the Hall of Fame in Cheyenne. They inducted me there a few years ago, but I'd written on that number and I knew exactly to the penny. It was like $15,987.86 or something, and so and when I did that, it was one of those deals that give me the confidence to say, "Hey, this is like the coolest, biggest rodeo. I'm not gonna doubt myself," 'cause in your mind, you can do it, but and when you're winning, of course, it's easy to have the confidence, but when you get broke and, you get to doubting yourself whether I'm good enough to be out there or not, and when I won Cheyenne that year, I told myself I'm never gonna go back to the hayfield, and that's what I had my job lined up to go back to hayfield and try to get money and I wasn't gonna take no for an answer. I was gonna find a way to get it done, and
Yeah.
that just gave me the confidence, give me some money. Uh, I told the story before. I had 2 shirts to my name. They was both blue and one of them might add stripes in or whatever, but I'd wear one for a couple of days, and I'd find a laundromat, and I'd throw my, socks and underwear and my jeans and my shirt in there and and then, get by another couple of days, and then I was stopping at laundromats more than I was anything else, it seemed like, and doing my laundry, and I said, after I won Cheyenne, we went to Casper the next week, and I went to Western store and bought like 8 or 10 shirts, and I'm like, hey, I'm not doing laundry every other day again. So that gave me the confidence to go on, and I got really close. I jumped in a rig with Marty Melvin right then. He'd won the all around at Cheyenne that year, and I won the steer wrestling. He was kind of by himself, and he was an old South Dakota boy, and we knew each other for a long time. And I jumped in with him, and he said, "Come on," he said, "I'll get you to enough rodeos, that you can make the finals." And there was no limits then on rodeos, and I think Cheyenne was the 43rd rodeo that I'd entered that year. And at the end of the year that year, 1st of November, I think I'd entered 128 rodeos. And so we only got to about 80 some of them, so we turned out about 40 times, but he was the master at entering. We might be at Seattle one day and somewhere in Georgia the next, but we was entered up, and we did a lot of driving and a little bit of flying, but anyway, I wound up 18th that year. I come up a little bit short, and
Was that in 83 or 84?
83.
83.
Yeah, I was 18th in 83, and I went again in '84, and had a little kind of rodeoed the same way, just entered here and there, and with certain ones, and then I'd want to go to California in the spring, and they wouldn't. So, and I kind of the same thing. I just kind of entered by myself, caught rides, went here and there, and you get in and start entering with a few guys, and maybe go a month with that bunch, and then get in with a different one, and I wound up 20th in '84, and got close again, but kind of the same thing. Just it was kind of a roller coaster, win and then get down, but I knew I was going to continue that, and I come home in '84, and kind of reevaluated. Had a lot of time to think there from November and December when you're not rodeoing, and went home and worked a little bit, pitched hay and fed cattle and did different things, and kind of the same thing. I'd go think, what do I need to do different? Because I know I can do this, but I'm tired of the roller coaster, the highs and lows, and what I realized myself is I need to be more consistent. Quit, jumping out there, and everybody wants to win first, of course, in that 3-second run, and everybody hoop and holler, but I said, just go try to throw every steer in 5 flat. That was always my goal. Just don't win. First is great, and then when they give you the steer, and you have the opportunity, take it. But the ones when you don't, just go out there and try to, don't take yourself out of it. And when you try to be 3, it's very tough to be 3. And when you say, "Hey, let's go be 5 flat," you're going to be 3 way more times than you're 5. But if you go
There's
out
a
there
lot.
saying,
It seems like there's a lot to that at a young age. We went through the same thing team roping. Everyone's wanting to set that arena record at a young age and announce your presence, and a lot of times trying to make more out of the steer than what you draw. And like
yeah,
that's what it looked like so many times. And I remembered going through it too, where then it's okay, now we slow down. Now you make sure you hit the barrier. Now you make sure your feet hit in the correct spot. All those little things. And then like you say, then the just taking the time to make sure your technique is correct, and you start probably finding yourself making better runs than when you were trying to force it.
yeah,
It's funny, this team roping and the steer wrestling, what you're saying is the same thing we all go through in both. I'm sure the calf roping and the breakaway as well.
yeah. And at that time, I'm thinking, who are the most consistent guys? And the first 2 that just, of course, Roy Duval just popped off, huge, and then Paul Hughes was another guy back then. I'm like, them guys, they weren't just winning first everywhere they went, but you stopped and looked, and they were getting a check, and they were in every short round. All back then, all the good rodeos, the good buildings, and Denver, Fort Worth, San Antonio, Houston, Reno, Cheyenne. It's 2 in a short round, and they were in the short round every time, and that's what I thought. I said, quit trying to be 3. I'd rather go win 10 fourths than first every 4 times. And then go place and be consistent. And I looked at those guys and thought, they don't just try to knock the barrier out every time, which they score great and they, were good horsemen and but they just went and made the same run every time. I seen Roy Duval throw hundreds and hundreds of cattle, and every run looked the same. I seen him throw a steer 2.9 in Angelo one year, and I've seen him be 3, 4, 5, 6, and every run was identical. I mean, other than the punch of the stopwatch, he didn't try to do shortcuts. He didn't try to do this, that. He went and made the same run every time. And when the steers were good, it just happened a lot faster.
So 85 comes around, and I think that was about when the move was from the NFR from Oklahoma City to Vegas, correct? Was in 85. So,
Yes. And
kind of a new era kind of
yes.
coming about in the rodeo world a little bit as well.
So I'll go back a little bit. In '83, I won Cheyenne riding Tommy Combs's horse Charger, and at that time, Charger was one of the top mount horses. Of course, Alfalfa had Catfish, and Bill Duval had Cadillac, and there were a lot of good horses out there. But I won Cheyenne, and so then that fall, I wound up in Shakota. We was at Kansas City, the last rodeo of the year, or the first rodeo of the new year, I guess I should say, and just missed making the NFR, and we were at Kansas City first rodeo of the new year, and I was with Tommy, and he said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I guess go, back to Nebraska and work." And he said, "Well, why don't you come to Shakota and just come on with me and we'll practice?" And I'm like, "Hey, that sounds great to me." I did, I'm 20 years old. I had nowhere to go, and so that's
At
kind of
that
how.
time, Chakota was the steer wrestling circle,
Yeah.
correct?
Yes, and I thought, "Man, that sounds great, get invited to come stay with him, live with him, practice every day, and get out of the South Dakota and Nebraska cold winters in, December, January, or November, December." And so I went to Shakota with Tommy and started rodeoing with him in '84, and that was kind of the plan, to rodeo with him and go. Well, then, Charger gets hurt, gets crippled that winter of '84, and that's when I got on Bill Duval's horse Cadillac, and so I didn't place at Houston. I just barely missed the short round, but it was my fault. I was way late on one steer, and I was used to Charger, who scored off your hand, and Cadillac scored off your feet, and he would not leave the corner until you kicked him, and so I got a hold of him and I nod and I give him his head, and we never moved. We sat there. So time I remembered, Bill had told me you got to kickstart him, and I missed the barrier about a foot and went out there, and I missed the short round by just a tenth or two. And so I got to riding him that winter, and a lot of cattle were fresh back then at a lot of the rodeos, and he absolutely would not move a hair until you kicked him. And once I learned that and learned how to score him, and that horse just fit me like a glove. And so I went ahead and rodeoed that summer and that fall, and that fall I wound up back in Shakota and staying with Duvall's this time. And Sam was just a year younger than myself, and we become good friends. And so I went to riding their horses and going to some, and I made the deal with Bill that winter to go to the winter rodeos with them and have a little more consistency in what I rode, not just jumping from rig to rig and riding different horses. And I loved riding Cadillac, and usually, I'd been home for a couple of months, the month of November, December, and waiting for the rodeos to start back up, and Denver was always the closest and one of the first ones from Nebraska or whatever. And you got to Denver, and it'd been might be a little bit of rusty and scared and whatever. And so I said, "Hey, I'm going to enter Odessa this year just to get a run or two under my belt before we, And so I get to Odessa, catch a ride down there, and I broke the barrier to win the first round, and come back and I won the second round. And instead of like being down, I'm like, man, that's the springboard I needed. Get that crap out of my system. Now I'm going to go to Denver, and I did. I placed on 2 steers out of 3, won the average at Denver, and I'm telling you, that winter just snowballed. It seemed like everywhere I went, I won a check, And when you're winning and your horse is working good and you're drawing
What were
good,
you
it just
riding back then?
that was Bill Duvall's horse Cadillac.
Cadillac.
So that was when I first started riding him pretty much full time. I'd rode him in '84 just enough to know that, gosh, he fit me and I liked him. And then that winter of '85, I was in that rig and riding him. And yeah, when you go to winning and it just, like I said, and you're with a good group of people and good hazers and it just
There's
snowballs.
nothing
The
funner. Like that, I
Oh,
think that's the addictiveness, I think, of the rodeo or the drug of the rodeo. One is when you're winning. Two is when you got a good group of guys around you. And
yeah.
then, man, just that crowd. When you're going to them buildings and there's sold out crowds inside a stadium, it's so loud. Those three things it's hard to find anywhere else.
It is, it is. Like I said, it's more addicting maybe than any drug
Mm.
you can take, and it's just the adrenaline high, but yet it's the camaraderie of the sport and the guys and being out there and the best thing about and that's why the bulldoggers was always so close. And the best thing about the sport is hey, I'm going to tell you about this steer that I had. I'm going to tell you every way in the world, you know. But then I'm still gonna back in there and try to beat you. And
Yeah.
I want you to try to beat me. Don't back off. I want to beat you at your best, and you're gonna
Yeah.
beat me at my best. But yet we're gonna have fun doing it. We're gonna push each other steers. We're gonna haze for each other, just whatever it takes. But yeah, after I went to winning there in '85, it just and kind of the same thing. My goal was to make the finals, kind of like the high school deal. I missed them there a couple of years, and now the goal is get there and don't let up no matter what it took. And I didn't look at the standings. I didn't look at the deal. I just thought, hey, I'm going to win at every opportunity I can. And when November 1st gets here, they'll tell me if I made it or not. And I went in second that year, so it was pretty cool from just being on the outside there a couple of years, wondering if you could do it, and then just the light switch that turned on, the switch that turned on, and it was all because of that horse, and he
So
gave me
much
so
to
much fun.
learning how to win. There really is. That's what
Mhm.
so many young kids, as you know, that, those little things you're learning, the struggles is where so much of the learning comes. And then, learning not only your technique and bulldogging, but then also getting feel on different horses and knowing what, just like I say, one goes off your hand, the other one goes off your feet. There's always certain things that you have to learn how to do. And then the better you get, the more adverse you get and the more horses you can ride because you got more feel. But man, going from barely making it, not making it, and then going in second in the world, especially as a rookie, once you got to Vegas, pretty much everybody was a rookie, correct? Because
Yeah, I
that's the
mean, it
first
was
time anyone had been there.
yeah, it was, and we had heard horror stories on how small the arena was, and Charlie, what people don't realize nowadays is, that was the smallest arena I'd ever seen. I'd never been in an arena nowhere close to that size, other than Rapid City, I guess.
Mhm.
And, but, the thing that we used to say that differentiated, professional rodeo and amateur rodeo was the score, and when I first got a card and when I first joined the PRCA, you know, even in the steer wrestling, I mean, you had to see 6 to 8, 12 inches, to not break the barrier. And the team roping, I team roped at a few rodeos back then as well with my brother. It was always hip or tail to the pin, and you let them steers out a long ways and the same way in the steer wrestling. And so we weren't used to taking that nod and ride start and the thing that, I think why we had so much success, we'd heard stories of how small that building was and how quick the start was gonna be. Uh, Ricky Huddleston rode Cadillac, myself, Rod Lyman, and, Bill owned that horse, and then, of course, Roy was making NFR back then, which he had his own horse, but, we were all in Dakota practicing, and we're like, Roy's got a big arena, 100-foot wide, 300-foot long, and you'd let them out there and go run them halfway, and we're like, "Hey, we need to," and they were the ones, not myself. I was young then. I was just glad to be there, but, like, we need to practice for this short building. So
Serena. Yeah.
We loaded up steers and horses and went to Vian, Oklahoma. There's an indoor arena down there and shorter and so we went down there for about 3 weeks in practice and just tried to. I've got a VCR, a tape somewhere. I need to find it and get it on a DVD, but we have practice sessions that we taped back then. Back then the old camcorders was that long and
Mhm.
weighed 30 pounds you put on your shoulder, but we took a camcorder down there and recorded, and I guarantee you that first week we missed way more steers than we caught because we were trying to catch them when they stuck their head out of the chute. We were trying to nod and ride, and we had never done it before, and
Yeah.
I hadn't, and so we're trying. But by the end of that third week, hey, we could nod and ride, and we could catch one,
Yeah.
8
Finding the
foot out there.
timing, correct? Because there was so much
Yes,
timing when you shorten things up to when
yeah,
you're,
and
when the horns are gonna be there and things like that.
yeah, and our horses weren't used to it. Our horses was used to, and the
Mhm.
Cadillac that
Yeah.
you kick started, so you almost had to go to kicking as you were nodding to get him to
You
leave.
almost in a way like 'cause that's what we had to do in the team rope, and we almost quit scoring. We got to
Yeah,
actually rope like healers because healers
yeah,
never scored, when they had to just go rope, and we
right,
had to kinda do that too because throughout the year, like you're saying, they had to score, and
yeah.
so you almost had to get them going with the steer so you could so I bet it was even more then, but did was the steers back then in '85, were they fresh at the NFR, or was
No,
that just a couple times?
they weren't in '85, and in '85, maybe the only year that it's been like that. We had 5 pens of steers in
Okay,
'85. And they
gotcha.
were they were from contractors. I don't know who decided that, if it was the director back then or I know I didn't ever get a say in it, and I was one of the contestants, but we showed up and here we got 5 pins of steers and they each went twice and I remember, some of them like, Reg Kessler had a set of steers there and Reg was always notorious, kinda like Neil Gay, of having big cattle, big steers and a little tougher, and it kinda put you to the test, but yeah, we had big steers then and that's probably the difference between then and now. I'm not saying that we didn't have good steers back then as well, but there was a lot more pens of bigger cattle that guys we'd run into.
Well, talk about your first NFR. What was Vegas like back then? What was the 10 rounds like? Because as you talk about your consistency, first NFR, first time anyone was there, you win the average, and then go on to become gain the world title in '85. What was that whirlwind of those 10 days like?
Well, it was kinda like going back to the years that I didn't make the finals, and that's kinda how it started. Uh, like I said, myself, I went in 2nd that year. Ricky Huddleston, I think, might have made it in 15th. Rod Lyman was maybe 4th, 5th, somewhere, and we were all riding Cadillac, and those 2 jumped out right away. 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th round, and they're placing. They're either winning a round, 2nd round, and I mean and my game plan when I went out there, yeah, go be consistent, and another thing, Charlie, it was different back then. They paid 4 monies in the round,
Yeah.
6 an average. So it was a little bit tougher to place in the round, and back then as well, if you jumped out and won the 1st round, you got to go last the next night, and it went on money won. So I didn't win anything the first night. I think both of them maybe placed in the early rounds. So now I'm not just first out, but I'm first on the horse. And Cadillac was one of those. We always thought he worked better the second,
Mhm.
third run,
Yeah.
get one
Like a
run out,
Kind of like a diesel. He just get warmed up.
yeah, get warmed up. And so now I'm first on him, and here no, I'm not going to say dominated, but I had a great year. I kicked butt all year long. And so goes in, gets to the halfway point in the 5th round, and I still haven't won anything. I've got everything caught. I've got all my steers caught and throwed down, but maybe Ricky and Rod's got 20, 30,000 one, and back then a big rodeo, the bigger rodeos, if you won 10,000 somewhere, that was a big rodeo. And I remember talking to Ricky and Rod on the way out there, and we're like, man, we'd love to win 10,000 if we got, that was kind of a goal. Win 10, 15,000 would be great. at Vegas, and $8,080 rounds, and think, gosh, if we place in 2 or 3 rounds, get 10, 12,000. And so here they've got 20, 25, 30,000 won by halfway point, and I haven't
They've already
scratched.
doubled their goal.
Yeah, and I haven't scratched, and I'm tickled for them, but I'm just, uh, I don't know if I'm not feeling sorry for myself, but I'm kind of just, and I made a phone call, and my dad was never one to sugarcoat anything, and my brothers, whatever. But even them, man, keep hanging in there, keep throwing them down, and uh, and I called Buck Buckles, my old friend that worked me in the hayfield all through high school, and he's like, quit feeling sorry for yourself. Go out there and if you want a place, go get it done. Don't they're not going to hand it to you. Get off your butt and go do it. And it was like a slap in the face. It was like what I needed. It's like you know. Hey, they're not going to hand this to you. You're going to have to go win it. Go do what you know how to do, and basically that's what he told me. Go do what you know how to do, and this is what you're there for, and it just give me a better attitude. And I was even thinking about changing horses halfway through and getting on something else. I was looking for an excuse instead of looking in the mirror. And after that phone call, I looked in the mirror, and I placed in the 7th round. I won 4th, and still, as it continued, I'm still creeping up and doing good in the average. And gets to the 9th round, I win it, and then won the 10th round, and it was fairy tale storybook ending. It's just how I wanted it. If I had to write it, go back and rewrite it, I'd have done it the same way. But it's kept you humble, keeps you humble, keeps you grounded, and then kind of got that boost and that kick in the butt that I needed, and went back and finished it off. And yeah, then just did what I had to do. And I really, I've argued, not really argued, but I've told people, like that first year, it was a long, grueling week, but then I had success there at the end, and it just, to me, it set up my whole career. I had confidence in that building, and it's like, hey, don't sweat the small stuff. You can't win every round. It'd be cool if you could, and maybe somebody will someday. But just go do your job, do what you know how to do. There's some things you can't control, and a lot of it you can, but just, I was so confident after that first year. It's like, hey, I mean, but the emotional roller coaster you go through till you get there, and then, it was kind of like, the few years that I come close to making the finals, and then finally did, and then it's like, hey, this is how it's supposed to be. So
Who were you
don't.
battling that year when you're going to the 10th round? Who had the shot at the title?
I think Marty Melvin that year, and that was kind of fun and ironic because in '83, he's the one that told me to get in and go with him, and so they had come down to in '85 going in. He went in number 1, I was number 2, and we was maybe 10 or 15, 20,000 ahead of the field, and so it was very close there, and we were still friends, but yet there was, and not saying that there was any tension or anything there, but you travel with a guy and then you get out, and we remain friends for to the end, but still there was a little bit, I went my way, he went his, and a little bit of rivalry there, I guess, and so, but yeah, we battled it out the whole way through, and
Then
and
talk a little bit about from '85 to 1990. You had those 5 years where you're still making the NFR, but not winning the world title. What was the changes? Also, who were some of the guys you were battling with every year in those 5 years?
Well, in '86, a guy named Steve Duhon came along, and he had a lot to say about that. He won the world in '86 and '87. John W. won it in '88 and '89, and Charlie, it's I look back and I'm thinking, gosh, that should have been my goal every year, was to be the world champion. But the 2 years I did not make the NFR, and I wanted to make it at Oklahoma City so bad. I really thought that building and the fresh cattle and the big cattle I thought it would have, fit me like a glove. Well, then when I didn't, and I'm going to a building that I didn't like the quick 3-second runs. I like the 5 and 6, 7-second, the fresh cattle and the big. But it's like, hey, you got to make the best of your situation. You got to adjust to it. And but once I made the finals, I won. My goal was just to get there. And then I got there, won the average, won the world, all this, and it was great. I'm glad that it all happened, but it's almost like a letdown. It's like, I was wanting them stair steps to go to the next level. Well, when you do it all at once, there's nowhere to go but down,
Down, yeah.
and or to do it again. And it's like, and I think I got complacent a little bit, and I'm like, hey, I'm just wanting to make a living, put money together, get a place, do this, and it really wasn't my number one priority. And I mean, sad to say now, I look back on it that it should have been. But I was sitting there in the Alfalfa Feddersen. I might have caught a ride with him. He might have caught a ride with us going out to the last perf at the NFR in '89. And I'm thinking, that John W.'s got it won, and he's like, yeah, if that blue-eyed, curly-headed, explicitive, from Shakota. And I'm like, well, I don't. He said, well, you're the only one that has a chance to beat him. And I hadn't even looked at it that way. I'm thinking, shit, Johnny's got it won if he don't, beat himself. And kind of the same way, I left Vegas that year, runner up, thinking, why wasn't I in that mindset going to the 10th round,
Mhm.
And I gave that speech at 1990 when I won the world championship. I said, I left here last year in a camper, going home, cold, and thinking, this should be my goal every year. This is where, and it wasn't. And it's sad to say, and kind of the same thing when I left there that year, thinking, gosh, other people think that I should be. Why didn't I do that for myself? And so I made it my goal in 1990 to be a world champion. And then when I won it in '90, I remember thinking, how cool was that I made this my goal a year ago. And I said, hey, let's do it again. And for a long time, from '90, '91 until I think maybe Luke, there wasn't a back-to-back champion for several years. And when I left there in '91, I said the same thing, but then I had horse issues and different things that in '92 and stuff that was beyond my control. But
Mhm.
but basically my whole career was, going back to the mental part of it. You put your mind to it, and you work towards a goal. And if you're thinking about it every day, like I said, the mind and to me, that's what a lot of the world champions all have in common, and I think,
So from 89 to 90, that's what it felt like for you then, was just that shift of, hey, I was maybe sidetracked here. I was just making the finals, making a living to where, all
yeah,
right, now it's just laser focused. My head's in the game. I'm gonna know where I'm at. I'm gonna know. You basically got more, all in.
yes.
Is that kind of what 90 was all about? Was like, all right, this is what we're gonna do here.
Yeah, it did, and the switch turned on, and I'm like, why
Got
why
consumed with it.
settle? Yeah, why
Yeah.
settle when you can, and I don't know that, if I was said that in '86 or '87, not saying that I would have been the world champion, because I'm sure Steve, would have other, words for that, because maybe that was his goal. But I mean, but to be included with those two guys, and so Steve in '86, '87, Johnny '88, '89, then I come back '90, '91, and '92 was maybe Mark Roy was in there one year that kind of broke up a 10-year deal. And then Steve come back in '93, and maybe Johnny in '94, me '95, in there, something like that. But
Yeah, because
yeah,
what'd you say? There's 3 of you in that 10-year run
yeah,
where the 3 of you had 9 of the 10 gold buckles.
right, right.
That was pretty
And
cool.
yeah, and it was cool rodeoing with those guys that, like I said, you're all rivals, but yet you're all really good friends. and
Mhm.
and it goes, talking about the camaraderie of the steer wrestlers. Steve and I probably talk at least once a week, if not more. And I don't talk to Johnny as much, but here a couple years ago, a few years ago, we all get together and go on a hunt or do something and get together and do things together. And but some of those guys, yeah, I've remained very close with.
This episode is brought to you by Ryan Studdard with Oak Ash Realty. Ryan, the broker and owner of Oak Ash Realty, is someone who understands the land, lifestyle, and the work that goes into it. Whether you're looking for acreage to run horses and cattle, a place with room for an arena, or a home that fits your family just right, Ryan has the experience to help you find that perfect property that fits your needs. If you're looking to sell and want an experienced broker that understands the nuances of farm and ranch properties, Ryan has that track record. From ranch land and ranchettes to residential and investment properties across North Texas, Ryan knows what matters. I've had the experience of working with Ryan multiple times over the last few years, and I can attest firsthand to his knowledge and experience. If you're thinking about buying, selling, or just want a straight answer about land or real estate, give Ryan Studdard a call at 817-683-9505 or check him out at oakandashrealty.com.
Talk about the three of you. Because there's always different styles. Talk about a little bit about Duhan's style, your style, John W., because John W. to this day still has probably one of the more unique styles. The technique I thought was just super correct for his size, but he was kind of the one that went against the grain on how you hold onto the reins and the saddle horn, and I don't think anyone else has tried to duplicate it that I've seen.
Right, and we would practice that way once in a while, but Johnny he was tough no matter where you put him, but he loved it out here on the West Coast. He stayed out here a lot. The bigger arenas, he had a lot of success at Salinas and Cheyenne and Tucson and some of the bigger arenas. Not that he couldn't do it, in the Thomas and Mack, because obviously he did and could, but he was one of those guys I think had to adjust to that because, I think if you talk to him, he would rather run one, he would rather go to a 5 or 6 second bulldog in any day than a 3-second one, and he didn't come back there and rodeo much back in Oklahoma, Texas, of course he did go to the big ones, the big winter rodeos and stuff, but in the spring and the fall when some of those rodeos, you had to be 3, he didn't come back to a lot of those, which he had a great style and he loved it out here and he stayed out here and that style fit him and where he rode the reins in the left hand and when you're at a long outdoor arena, you have time to do that, to drop your reins and go to the saddle horn where if you're nodding and riding and trying to catch one on the score line, and to be 2-9, 3 flat, 3-1, it's tough to do all those moves. And so Johnny had a great style for, and a smaller guy. And what made Johnny was just a good cowboy. And I've always said that that's what I wanted people to say about me. Growing up on a ranch, I felt like I was above average horseman, and where a lot of bulldoggers get a bad rap of some of them, have to be led to the box. They're tough once they get a hold of a steer, but they might not be the best cowboys or horsemen and Duhan was like that. Duhan could rope and not saying that I could have made the NFR on the team roping, but I feel like had that been my goal and I put my mind to it and I'd have worked at it like I did my steer wrestling, I think maybe, I can tell myself that I could have. Nobody else may ever believe me, but I believe that myself. And I think Steve was the same way. I think Steve and Johnny did make the NFR and the calf roping and he was tough enough hand, that, and Steve roped really well and still does. And I thought, if we would have concentrated and put our energy into that as well, or, instead of the steer wrestling, I believe, and I think that's kind of the mindset of most world champions, they put their mind to it and, you're not going to tell me no.
Yeah. Yeah. I talked about too as some of the other thorns in your side. Like, it seemed like through that same era, you had your Todd Fox, Mike Smith. Man, I loved watching that guy bulldog. Just a beast of a man, a big old bear. And every time like he would get down in there, he'd slap that steer on the back. And it was almost like you could just hear him almost telling that steer like, hey, daddy's home. Just the way he held himself and the way he bulldogged, those guys seemed like thorns in the side every year as well.
Yeah, and they were tough competitors, and I don't know, I've talked about it before. Todd Fox was the most competitive person, not just in the arena, but out. If it didn't matter if you were pitching pennies along the crack in the sidewalk, he wanted to win first, and and he was a great competitor. My only thing about Todd is I don't think Todd approached Vegas like he did the whole rest of the year. The whole rest of the year was a do or die, go down swinging, try hard. Not saying, and I don't know what he did different at Vegas, but it was like he wasn't as aggressive, in my opinion, as he was the whole year. He changed something up. He tried to, I don't know what he did different there, but and not saying that he could have never won it. I'm not knocking him in that way, but it was almost like I had that confidence when I walked in there. I knew you was gonna have to contend with me before it was over with, and I think, Duhan had that attitude. John W. had that attitude, and like Rod Lyman, great friend of mine, and made it 14 times, but just could not finish it, I guess, in Vegas, and you know, and I don't know. I think it was, their mindset or something that held them back. I don't know I can't say, but that's just my opinion. And I kind of had that, and I know Duhan for sure had it, and from his football attitude, and you knock somebody down, you don't let them up, and that was you know kind of the mindset that I had and he had, and we call it the killer instinct or whatever. Is you got a chance to finish him off, and
Yeah.
I guess if you've never done that, or and in my case and Steve's case, the first year we made the finals, we both did it, and I think it just stuck with us, and when you make it, Todd made it several times, like 14 maybe or something, or maybe even more than that, and Rod made it 16, but when you don't finish it off, I don't know if there was doubt that crept in, later on, or what it was, or what held them back, because they were so competitive and so tough all year long, and then just couldn't seal the deal there, and so I think
And I think throughout that era too, you've seen that a lot. You've seen the killers that stood out in every event. You've seen when Jake and Clay and the team rope, and then when Speedy showed up, and you've seen the other guys because it was so different. And the same thing when Fred and Cody.
yeah,
There were certain guys in every event that found that niche in that little arena. Then once they got that taste of blood, there was no letting up,
yeah.
and it was something that was so different than any other arena and set up throughout the year that, man, it seemed like once a guy got their confidence, those killers, man, they like
Yeah.
you say, you never left your foot off their throat once you got the edge.
Right, right. It was like the shark circling in the water once
Mhm.
they seen or tasted the blood, it was hard to keep them back, and that what you said about Fred and Cody, it was so fun to watch, and not saying that the other 13 guys didn't belong there, but, it was almost like they elevated their game, and I think a lot of us did that, and when, Luke came along, and like Tyler Wagasback now, and, uh, and you mentioned earlier in the show that, about learning to win, and one of the greatest compliments I think I've ever received is, when Tyler won one of maybe his second or third world championship, might have even been his first, I don't remember, but he said, his dad, taught him how to steer wrestle, and he came and lived with me, and I hauled him, and he said, "Oat taught me how to win." And that meant a lot, and, we talked a lot going down the road, and I said it, I seen it, 2 or 3 years before he ever made his first national finals. I thought, and he'll go down like John W. as one of the greatest styles that's ever, Tyler, I've never seen as many good runs from one person in my life. He can
And
make. Yeah,
clutch runs too, like,
yes,
just a lot like about what your career was with those 7 go-round wins in the 10th round, those clutch moments.
yeah,
Those are things when you see where somebody's wired a little bit differently than a lot of other
yeah,
people.
yeah, and he's had the success there. He knows he can do it, and he knows, that the rest of the field is watching him and looking at him, and doesn't matter if I come in 15th or first, you're going to have to contend with me type deal. And he has that confidence. But we went a lot of miles down the road together. He stayed at my house a lot, and when he first started, and one of the things that I really sticks out in my mind, we went to Guyman one year and fresh cattle, and Tyler's like 3 flat, 3-1 or something, and breaks the barrier on the first, in the first round, and outstanding run, but I'm like, doesn't matter how many people hooped and hollered, you still broke the barrier. I'd rather you missed it that far and went out there and been 5.
Yeah.
We need to be here on Sunday when payday's here, and we just talked a lot about that, about when to put your foot on the gas and when to pump the brakes and slow down. And I said, yeah, we all like to win every go around, but I said, I would rather win every average, and just, not win as many go-arounds, but the average is where the big money's at, and we talked about stuff like that a lot, and then when he said that, he said, I taught him, you know, we talked a lot of situations over, and hopefully, that was my contribution, I guess, to his success.
What do you think it was that gave you that killer instinct in round 10? What do you think it was when the pressure was up that you found that zone? Because that's what everyone's looking for. That's what everyone has the questions of, is like when things are hard, there's some guys in the bathroom with their head in the toilet, and then there's some guys that are just, it almost makes them more level. What is it that you felt like you had that when those moments came that you you gamed?
Well, it goes back to my high school years, and I've told this story to people before, and it's crazy, but we lived out in the middle of nowhere, like I said, and didn't get to go to town a lot, didn't get to do a lot of things. Well, I'm the youngest of 6, and my 2 older sisters, 2 older brothers moved away. It's just me and my younger sister, and she rodeoed some, but rodeo wasn't really her deal. She played sports, she was into basketball and different things. But anyway, I'm out there in the middle of nowhere, and I had a dummy, like I said, a roping dummy, and had probably a set of horns this wide. I mean, went out and came up, and a little tougher to rope than the average old black plastic headed, that everybody has.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
my brother had made it, and like I said, not just back then. I wanted to do rough stock. I wanted to rope everything, so I would rope that dummy, and I'd tell myself I was going to rope it 100 times in a row without a miss, and I'd get to roping it, and, you've roped the dummy enough, it takes a while to get to 100. Well, I'd get up there 70, 80, and whew, boy, getting a little tougher to breathe, felt like an anvil sitting on your chest,
Mhm.
and I don't know how long, Charlie, it took me, but I would get up there 80 or close to 90, and I'd miss, and I would be so mad at myself. And once I missed, I go grab that rope and just run up there, and I could rope it so fast and
Yeah.
so easy.
When
It
you would
was
start back with
effortless.
1, it was like nothing,
It was so
right?
effortless. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
from 1 to
Yep.
10, and I could rope it,
Mhm.
and I'd get up there at 80 again, and boy, get to thinking about it. Don't miss. Well, you're letting that doubt creep in, and you're telling yourself you're going to. Well, you get, and literally, I'll bet it took me, literally months, because that was my goal. Well, my parents are great people, but pretty strict, and 9 o'clock at my house when I was in high school, you didn't come in at 9 o'clock. You were in bed with lights out at 9 o'clock, and no radio on, no TV. It was, you went to bed, and so 8:15, 8:30 or whatever, they hollered at you. You went in, you took your bath, and you went to bed, and it wasn't just a minute. I'll be there in a little while. Or it was when it was now. And so same thing. I would lay in my bed, and I'd get so mad at myself, I'd almost just tear up. Why is that so easy to rope the first 10 times or 20 times and so hard the last 20? And so I was out there one day and roping, and same thing. And I threw my rope down, went over there, kicked the dog or whatever, kicked the side of the building and pretended that I had missed, which I hadn't. And I walked over, picked that rope up. I roped it 20 times. And finished off my 100. And I'm like, that's plumb simple. Why is it taking me forever to learn this? And it's all right here. It's all mental. It's what you tell yourself. And so after that, I could rope it 100 times in a row. I didn't miss. I went up there and I didn't let it bother me because I'm like, hey, when it gets that way, take that deep breath, tell yourself you missed, tell yourself, and literally, so going fast forward to, it was either 90 or 91. I beat Mike Smith by 60 some dollars for a world championship. And I had to win the last round to win the world championship. I couldn't win second. And so when I found out what I drew, I had 2 or 3 steers picked out that I really wanted, that I thought I could win the round on, and I didn't draw the 2 or 3 that I really wanted. And to make it worse, I'd already had maybe one of the best ones on them in either the first, fourth, or seventh round, the steers you run in the 10th round, and knowing that I had won a earlier round on that steer, and somebody else, you're against the top 15 guys in the world. Well, you know, somebody's going to have that good steer. And so I picked out a couple and I didn't. And when I found out the steer that I had, I looked and seen who had him, and Brad Gleason was a good friend of mine, and Brad had threw that steer maybe in 5 flat. And I think he'd maybe been the quickest on him. And I go talk to Brad and I said, can I win the round on him? And, we talked about it, and Brad said, you have to max the barrier out. So that steer throws good. He just runs really hard. Mm-hmm. And he said, if you max the barrier out and them guys stub a toe a little bit on them better ones, said, you got a chance,
Yeah.
And so I made a game plan right then. I was riding around how you ride around in the tent up there in the circle. And I run that steer in my mind like I'd roped that dummy. I run him by breaking the barrier. I run him by missing the barrier that far. I run all these scenarios through my mind and said, okay, running back in there. Here's my second chance. How many times have you missed and thought, gosh, I wish they'd running back in there, and still going back to some of the life lessons or whatever. I run a steer in Salt Lake City one year, and everybody told me how good he was. They couldn't wait to tell me, oh, that's the best one on him. And I screwed him up. And it wasn't, it was the mental part. 'Cause I'm thinking, well, I should win first because everybody else does. Well, I went out there, instead of doing what I knew how to do, I let, other stuff creep in. Well, then I was embarrassed. Then I was like, crap, and I come right back and drew another steer, and I was riding Jack Hannum's horse that year. So I asked Jack about my second steer, and he said, you remember how good I told you your first one was? And I said, yeah. And he said, this one's just the opposite. This is the worst one on them. And now, whether or not the steer was, but I was so mad because I'd messed that first one up. I placed in the second round, and I'm like, he told me, he said, I wasn't just telling you that. And he said, that steer's not good. And you made the best round I've ever seen on him. So he said, if you'd have bulldogged your first one like that, you win it hands down. And still just going back to the learning process and the experience. And so, you can't let doubt creep in, or like that first one, I was so embarrassed at myself and for my performance. I'm like, God, I wish I could run that sucker back in here. Let me have one more shot at him. I know I can win it, Well, I didn't have that one. I had a different one. So I took it out on him, I guess. And so that's what I did that year.
91. What horse were you riding in 91?
Remember? A horse at Duval's, or I guess Roy we had a horse in 90 of Roy's, and then that horse at North Platte, we went out to go to slack, and he was dead in the stall. So We had a horse, I'm trying to think what even we called him, Melvin, I think. A guy named John Burdine from Eufaula, Oklahoma owned him, and Roy leased him for the rest of the year. Once
Was
when
it a
his
was it
horse
a bay horse?
Yeah, bay horse
Yeah.
with a streak in his
Real
face.
flat on the ground, fast-footed.
Yeah, he was
He
super,
was
super
cool.
nice horse, and
Mhm.
so we rode him that year, but yeah, I put it in my mind the scenarios. I said I can't break the barrier, but I can't miss it that far. I've
Yep.
got to max it out, and so I run the steer in my mind when I broke the barrier, and I'm like running back in there, and so I played the scenarios in my mind, and then when I got to the time, I'm like, here's my redemption run, and so when I went and then I threw him at I think 3.8 and I was looking up at the clock and I knew I had to win the round and there was already a 3.8. So then my heart like I didn't figure I figured first the night before would win it, second wouldn't. I didn't
Right.
figure what the split would be
Right,
and
right.
the split, and then it did let me win it by like $147 or something that year. So
That's interesting because when you talk with so many winners, everyone has their own recipe. Everyone has that what works for them moment, and, I've heard that a few times when guys talk about, "Man, if I'd have broke out on this steer and I got a rerun on this steer, because like you say, I've done it before when we had fresh steers at home. It's like, "Alright, I got 10 steers, I'm gonna run through twice, I'm gonna be 20 for 20 today." The
yeah,
amount of times I've missed 18, 19, and 20, because what you said it perfectly. You could feel like someone was standing on your chest. You
yeah,
could feel the self-doubt come through, and then you could feel when that self-doubt came, your body didn't move the correct way.
right,
It's
right,
something too when you're shortness of breath, something to do when you're focusing on the wrong things, what not to do, not focusing on not missing. And then all of a sudden, if you'd have been running steer number one again, body's moving normal, your breathing's back to normal, you can feel your body. So there is something I've heard some guys talk about that winning strategy of being able to, man, if I'd have missed this one and then got to come right back and run him again,
yeah,
how much you would have just gained as opposed to being in your head that first time. That's
yeah,
funny you said that because that everyone has their own strategy. Everyone finds that way of their that works for them. That way that gives them the edge to basically, like you said, find that zone when you need it in the 10th round when all the pressure's there.
yeah, and I don't know anybody that hasn't roped the dummy pretending that it's the 10th round at the NFR.
100%.
I
Yeah.
mean, whether you got a dummy that you hit or heel or both, or, you and your buddies or your partners, I mean, when we roped the dummy a million times in college, and you set up
Mhm.
that run. This is the 10th round, and so that's what worked for me, and that's what, so when it got to the 10th round, if I just had a chance, that's all I asked for, and I said, "Try to put yourself in that position every year, not to have to win the round, but put yourself in the position to where if I do my job, then, it can happen," and that's kinda like in '89, I did have a chance to win the world if Johnny screwed up. Well, Johnny, he was one of those guys that,
Yeah.
that wasn't I could go win the round and, that didn't control what he did. I mean,
Yep.
he had, if he goes and beats himself, yeah, then I mean, but, it I don't think it's as satisfying as when you have to go do something to win it, to be, and so I wasn't counting on anybody else to screw up to let me win a championship.
Yep.
I just had to
Yep.
not screw up myself.
So 91, between 91 and 95, was it injuries starting to kinda creep in a little bit?
Well, in '92, I had horse issues, and I had a horse get hurt, and I actually rodeoed with either Roy or Bill or Sam from '85 to '91. '92, uh, the horse that we rode in '91 at the finals, I thought Roy was gonna buy, and I went home to Nebraska for Christmas, went to my folks's, and when I came back down and we were entered in Denver and everything, and when I left, I thought all intention was Roy was gonna buy this horse, and that's what we were gonna ride all the winter rodeos, and but he didn't. I don't remember why, but he didn't get him bought. It fell through or whatever. He bought a different horse, and, the horse he bought didn't fit my style. I didn't like him as well. Uh anyway, so I started out, and I had my own horse that I practiced on, rode a lot in the summertime. He was kind of long strided. He was great at the big outdoor arenas in Cheyenne and places, and wasn't the best maybe at Denver and Fort Worth where the cattle were fresh, but I decided then that's kind of when I got out and got in my own rig, and had my own crew, and I was almost too worried about my crew more than myself winning. I wanted them to win. I wanted my horses to work, and it was just a new experience. It was different than, throwing your suitcase in a camper and letting Roy do 99% of the driving, and all you had to do is show up and go back there and bulldog, get out and go do it. Then from having your own rig, your own team of horses, hazing for guys, and it just uh 92 was a pretty trying year. I made it, but it was, very trying of keeping your own rig and horses and health and everything together and uh and then kind of the same way 93 was I got a new horse and he went to doing well and but just adjusting to everything of being out on your own in your own rig and adjusting and other people hazing for you, not the guys that you were with but I did well. I made those finals those years and then when 94 came, I went and tried a horse and missed a steer and herniated a disc in my back and lived with that for a couple of years trying to and finally in 94 it got so to the point I couldn't go anymore and I had to go have surgery on my back and and came back late that summer, but just too late
What
in
did
the
they do?
year.
Did they fuse it?
No, they actually just trimmed it. They didn't have to
Trimmed it.
put a rod or a
Yeah.
fuse or anything. They just trimmed it away, and it came back well, and I came back fine. But it's always been. I'll never forget. It was about the same time. I remember Troy Aikman and Joe Montana had both had back surgery, and it was all in that era. And they both came back and they pulled hamstrings. And I remember sports reporters talking about, I wonder if there was any, correlation to the back surgery.
Restrictions at what their
And I'm
back would
like,
let them not do.
oh,
Yeah.
100%. I'm thinking, because I mean, not that I was just limber like a gymnast, but I used to could, flat hand the ground, and now I can't hardly even touch my ankles, and it
Yeah.
just your hamstrings got so tight and sore, and you just your movement was restricted, and trying to, as you're getting older, not that I was old, but now I'm in my 30s and not my 20s anymore, and have a little bit of restriction there to your movement and it was just and trying on my own and having which, I wound up having some good horses and stuff in my career, but just to come back from that, and then the same thing, you let that doubt creep in, well, has my time came and gone, can I still fight it out with these 20-some-year-olds, and just to get back to where you get back in that groove and get to winning and kind of the same thing there in 94, I made myself hey, I was scared that I was, because you see a lot of guys that injuries do end their career and they don't ever come back and be as tough as they were before. And so I probably got in better shape that fall of 94 and got ready for the winter rodeos and uh like I said, we're not ever accused of being the sharpest knives in the drawer bulldoggers sometimes, but I should have carried that on the rest of my career. Should have stayed in that good a shape, but as you go to winning and it comes back and not that I let myself just go, but I proved myself, hey, I still could do it and still had it but I should have attributed more to that by being in shape and working at it that hard that I think we get to taking it for granted that we're going to get to do this the rest of our lives. And, Father Time's pretty much undefeated. So,
Father Time's undefeated. So you come back in 95 from an injury, got back in shape, got that Eye of the Tiger back. Also, I heard too was one of the horses that you had trained was one that you was able to go and win the world on as well. That had to be kind of a special win in itself with that. Was that correct?
Yeah, it was, and that's the horse. I rode him in '93 at the finals. He was I hauled him the winter of '93. We run extras on that horse at Denver and Fort Worth and stuff just to try to get him used to being in a building, being inside, and then I rode him at the finals in '93. So he was one of them, people would ask if I trained him, and I said, "I'll take the credit," but, I mean, from the first year we run on him, that horse, it was like he knew what to do,
Yeah.
his pattern did get better. It wasn't perfect at first, but I sent the horse to Nebraska, and Paul Cleveland, a friend of mine, they rode him on the ranch a little bit that year, and then it's about the time there was 2 young kids in high school named Todd and Randy Soon, and they were steer wrestling a lot, and Paul would put them on that horse, and so you know how it is in high school, you're not scared to get on anything or do anything, and they ran a lot of steers on him, and then that fall, in the fall of '92, I got to practicing on him, and like I said, we hauled him that winter just to get him used to things, but that horse came on so fast, and I take the credit for him, but he pretty much learned it himself.
You talk about coming back in 95 and getting to be a little bit older. And there's something too. I was hearing Tom Brady talk on a podcast. It went viral on social media. It was interesting when he was talking about, in his 20s he was good, in his 30s he was great. By the time he was 40, he was unstoppable because he had mastered his craft. And as you're talking about now, being able to get your own rig, started getting your own bulldogging horses. You're talking about hazing. How much of it credit do you give the hazers and the fact of, some of the hazers you had for you, hazing for you, but then also how much did you feel like that helped you as a bulldogger when you started hazing? Because there's something to seeing the run and how it's developed and when your feet hit and where you can kind of manipulate those steers where your craft as you're getting older and understanding the game, your knowledge is just getting to where after a while there's almost like there's not a steer that you haven't seen that you know how to have a strategy for.
Right, and there's a lot of great hazers out there still, and there was then, but, hazing horses are probably as more I thought I had 2 of the nicest hazing horses maybe that's ever been out there, and that made me feel like I was good, and when you have a horse that you're going out there at Cheyenne or whatever, and you're going Mach 1 and you're getting up to the steer and you feel like, "Hey, I need to pick up to stay beside this steer so I don't pass him," and before you touch the reins, that horse does it himself, it's just that's when you know you got a great horse, and it's so fun to get to ride horses like that, and yeah, I think there wasn't very many great hazers that didn't steer wrestle themselves. I wanna say pretty much all of them. If there's been some out there that's never steer wrestled, I don't I'd be surprised, and so if you don't if you haven't done it yourself and know, you know what you like, what you want, and
Not only that too, probably who you're hazing for, you almost know what their strengths are too as well. Is there a little bit of that also?
yeah, yeah, and, and we talked earlier some of the great horses, and like Catfish, maybe one of the greatest steer wrestling horses of all time, and if you rode him up in there, he would give you a great go, and but a lot of guys like Catfish because when you got off, he took a big step left, and myself, I would rather have one run straight by, and there's
Mhm.
a debate probably still to this day, and steer wrestlers talking about, some guys want a horse to move and take a big step. Some of them want them to go straight by. Some of them, and once you
And
get
those theories, just for everyone to understand, like when you're talking about when you get in and they separate, some people say that helps them with where they've placed their feet, correct?
right,
And
right.
then when some are straight, people have learned how to be able to keep their feet from that horse staying straight. So almost like two different styles. Would that be correct?
Yes, it is, and kinda going back to when I talked about the Dave Brock. Dave was, not as long-legged as I was and different things and compact, and he'd ride up there and get a good head catch, and then he wanted that horse to get out of his road and set his feet way over there to the left, and because he wasn't planning on sitting straight and sliding one down the arena. He wanted to, that horse to get out of his road so he could get that steer turned back and get him throwed, and, uh, and that's the difference in styles, and Duhan was like that. Duhan loved a horse that, we'll get, ribbing each other, and I'll ask him, the best horse he's ever ridden, and he'll say a horse named Jimmy that Jeff and Gary Green pulled for a while, and I don't think that I could have made circuit finals on that horse, let alone win the national finals on him. He didn't fit my style a bit. And that horse run up there and took a big step and went left. And Steve liked that, and he could control it.
Yeah.
And that's why, like a Cadillac or a different horses, they fit me. And a lot of guys that rode Cadillac didn't care much for him because he didn't fit their style, so it's just personal preference basically. But once you get to going and people know what you like, and kind of the same thing, I hazed different for some of the guys in my rig than I did others. I knew what this guy want, how he wanted these steers, and and later on, like when I started hauling Tyler Weisbach, and not a lot of guys like steers that set up. And Tyler's like, I want every one of them to stop. That means I'm going to catch them quicker. He said,
Yeah.
when you see I'm down in there, he said, blow by that dude and, get him to throw his head up, quicker I got my feet on the ground, the quicker I'm going to be, quicker that
Yeah.
stopwatch. And some guys just dread a steer that stops, and they don't want one at all. And he's learned how to, and that's what makes him so tough. I think he's got a game plan for every type, and he grew up doing every type, and not saying that that's what makes him, but little things like that is what separates the champions from the guys just there.
Folks, if you're in Texas or Oklahoma and need a top-tier metal building, you need to call the guys at Cowboy Steel Construction. Founded by Trey Norris back in 2000, Cowboy Steel has grown into one of the premier metal building contractors in the region. Need an indoor arena? Or want to cover the one you've already got? These guys know how to get the job done right. Strong, reliable, and built to last. Whether it's for ranch, business, or personal use, Cowboy Steel Construction has you covered, literally. Check out their work on social media at Cowboy Steel Construction on their Facebook and Instagram page.
Cowboy Steel Construction. We've got you covered.
Who was some of the hazers that you felt like that when the pressure was on that you loved seeing those guys over there? I know you probably had a handful. I know probably everyone probably hazed for you, but who was some of the main guys that when things got thick that you wanted to see over there?
Well, like I said, early in my career, it was Bill Duval. That's who I won my first championship, him over there hazing, and Bill hazed for millions of different guys, and he's one of the, and Roy hazed for me a lot, and then Bill's son Sam, I traveled. Sam's probably hazed as many or more steers for me than anybody, and and that was kind of when I first started going with Bill, he thought because I was long and tall that I wanted a lot of room, so I'd go up there, and it was almost like he reined off, and sometimes, and I didn't have much luck, and I finally convinced him, and he's like, I know you're bigger, you need some room. And I said, no, I want it tight. I want it compact. And then once he learned that, but Sam Duval hazed for me a lot. And then later in my career, when I was, you know, his younger brother Spud hazed for me at the NFR. And I think, uh, you know, guys like Duhan and Alfalfa Fedderson, and there was so many great hazers back then, and so many good horses. Tommy Combs, Tommy hazed for me, a lot of steers in the practice pen, and Tommy had one of the easiest hazing horses. I mean, I think you could put anybody off the street on him, and it's like that horse knew. And I had a couple horses like that helped me later on in my career that I felt like I could put anybody on them and, just told them, don't try to do anything special. Just let them do their job
Yeah.
and all the great ones. And like now, and it really shows up at the Thomas and Mack. When that bulldogger, when he can go as he's nodding, you better have a hazing horse and a hazer over there and it's
So
probably
fast,
shows
isn't
up
it?
more now. And
Yeah.
that Metallica horse of Tyler Pearson's and with Tyler over there, has been one of the great ones for the last decade now,
Yeah.
and it shows up when you're on something mediocre or you're a half a step late, gosh, that it's very important, probably more so nowadays in that building than it ever has been.
You talk about back in your era, probably one of the most colorful hazers that we all kind of remembered and was Alfalfa Feddersen. And, every time we would just go watch the steer wrestling and watch him, hey, I mean, he loved it. Just loved it. It seemed like just eat, breathe, and sleep thinking steer wrestling. Like the dude loved the game, it felt like. And he
Yeah,
was such a colorful character over there.
he did, and like you said, a colorful guy and very vocal, very loud, and didn't matter where you was, and
Pump you up. I
he's
mean,
the biggest
he could have a
cheerleader.
steer wrestle. He could have a team roper thinking they could steer wrestle. He could
Yeah.
just pump you up. I
Yeah,
loved it.
and it surprised me that's John W. loved him for his hazer because that's what he said. He said, "That guy pumps me up so much." And you get thinking, John W. Jones Jr., you need pumped up, which, it's everybody likes somebody in their corner. And I'm telling
Yeah.
you, if he was in your corner, he was there, 100% and you knew it. But yeah, Johnny, had a lot of success and Johnny loved that horse, and not only catfish, but when Johnny rode his own horse, a lot of times he had alfalfa haze for him,
Yeah.
just for that, because of him being his biggest cheerleader and biggest fan and pumping you up, thinking you could throw anything down that they run in there.
Yeah, you think of Alfalfa Feddersen being one of the more colorful, guys in steer wrestling, and then when Sid Steiner showed up, he brought a lot of color to steer wrestling and the PRCA.
Yeah,
I would say that, like, it took me a minute to kind of get desensitized to it in a little bit. I mean, my dad was pretty hard. He canceled his PRCA subscription when they put him on the cover. It was hilarious.
I
And it
know.
was funny back then because you were starting to see the battle of tradition and the sport growing.
Yes.
And there is that battle, you seeing what Rocker's doing, following right in them same footsteps,
Yeah.
He's breaking the traditional mold, but we're still rodeoing. But, you think of the fact of I remember some guys talking, and there's some good articles being talked about, if we don't make sure that there's not some youth coming up, as fans and things like that, if all of the fans of rodeo just hit a certain spot, but we don't kind of keep that next generation coming, there's something to that. And I think that's where Sid, now you see Rocker, and also too with the amount of coverage that rodeoing's getting, you're seeing it evolve now where man, there a lot of these guys are becoming some stars. I would say with a lot of the great articles Kendra writes. I would say the social media presence now, everyone can watch everyone at all times, and between social media and the Cowboy Channel, and man, you're seeing such a growth in the sport, and
Yeah.
it's been fun to watch.
Yeah, it has, and what you said is very true, and I can remember as a kid, to me, what made I'll never forget it, and they said it way back then, is what made boxing such a great sport. Muhammad Ali was that figure like you're talking about, and you loved him or you hated him. There was no middle ground,
What
and
I had seen is you have 2 fans. You have haters and you have the people that love you, and there's no in between. But what I'd seen was your haters are just as loyal as the people that love you. So you have twice as many fans
exactly.
when you're that polarizing.
Yes, and that's what I was gonna say is love him or hate him, but you're gonna watch him. And the haters wanted to watch him. They probably had more people that hated him watching him than people that loved him because they wanted to see him get knocked on his butt,
Mhm.
and the haters are wanting to see you fail or whatever. But you're still you got creating fans. They're watching it and talking about the young guys coming on and everything. And that's basically a newfound passion of mine. I've always loved kids and I love helping kids. And so we've been doing the junior NFR, the past since 2017, I guess. I come on board and feel like it's been so fun watching, uh, so in 2017, our first year, there was 2 members that were 12 years old that was in the steer wrestling. You don't see many 12-year-old. Most of them wait till they're 13, 14, but Cash Rob was one of them. His dad would bring him to several events, and Denton Good from South Dakota was another one. And to watching those little guys at 12, and it was a celebration if they just got a time. It might be 30 or 40, but they get one tipped over and you hooped and hollered. And then to watch as they progressed every year, and then, Cash Rob making the NFR and winning the average first year he makes the NFR, to me, that's so cool. And, not saying he did it because of me in no way. I just hope that I had some little, stepping stone to get him there faster. And then that's what we're doing. We're getting those kids. And, Bridger Anderson was our champion in first year and in 2017. And then, Bridger's now been to finals 3 or 4 times and not just the steer wrestling, but there was a saddle bronc rider this year, the Weston Patterson. He had come to some of our events back when he was younger, and Dean Thompson, world champion bareback rider, and he come to our steer wrestlings a few times, and to me that is so cool to watch these younger guys as they get better, as they get more confident, as they grow, and and this year in the steer wrestling, Gavin Swallow, made the NFR, and I know Gavin's going to reflect back, and I know he didn't have the NFR that he wanted to have, but there's so much talent there in that guy, it's unbelievable. And when he learns and figures it out, and and to see Tyler and Rowdy have so much success when they lived with me when they were younger, and then to make the finals and do well, and we're just trying to build another platform for them to get there a little quicker. And everybody says, "Gosh, I wish they had that when I was a kid," and I think the same thing. I said, no, the only time we got to see anybody from different states or anything is if you made the national high school finals,
Finals. Yep.
and that's the only time. And so now these guys are seeing each other at a lot of these events, and time they do make, get their PRCA card, well, heck, they know 90% of the guys that they competed against because they're out there, and the ones that are. And I'm not saying you have to go through our event or whatever to make it, but a lot of them do, and then just that they're trying and they're competing, and we give them a platform to do it, and
Well, it's
it's
so
not gonna be
important.
long.
It's so important what you're doing, and I think what Steve Duhon's with the rope or the bulldog, and he's putting on over there, and then what you're doing with this is because your guys' presence among those kids is gonna, there's something about steer wrestling that's so addictive because when you have this many guys rooting for you, man, it's like that thing that we talked about earlier. You don't get that in a 9 to 5. There's adrenaline with what you guys do, not only when you nod your head, but then having your guys around you and support that you don't feel that, once you get done playing sports in high school. And so I think it's so important. One thing that with what you're doing, because one thing that B. Bray was telling me about with Echo Brand, because they're always looking at the junior events and what the numbers are in every event in the junior, the high school, college, because they know that number at the junior events is what's going to start reflecting at the top. And if those numbers go down, they know that those numbers are not going to be as strong when it gets to the top. And so, what you and Duhon are doing for that next generation, the steer wrestling is so important to keep those guys, wanting to be steer wrestlers because, it's a softer generation. It's more easier to be on your phones and be a YouTuber and things like that than, with than there is a lot of guys that want to freaking, be a steer wrestler. But, it seems like once a lot of those guys that, playing sports that were love the contact, this is the event that, man, you get to keep doing this after school and after college and get that adrenaline feel. So I'm so proud of what you guys are doing for your guys' event to keep that next generation coming up.
Yeah, and, we've talked about that before. The kids nowadays, they grow up looking at a computer screen, at a cell phone, at a video game, where we had one channel growing up, and if somebody didn't stand there and hold the rabbit ears just right, you couldn't see that one, and
Well, the
and,
parents, they kicked us out. Get
yeah,
outside till that sun goes down. You go outside, get creative, grab your BB gun, grab your bike, whatever. I don't give a crap. You get outside.
yep,
It's so hard now with all the things that you have to compete with, because
yeah,
the stuff on YouTube for kids. I mean, it's that dopamine rush that they get on that is way more exciting than anything out there. But it's like, no, doors locked. Get out there, figure it out.
right, yeah, and that's the way we were, and then especially with 6 of us kids, and our cousins lived right across the past year, and there was 5 of them, so we found a lot of mischief and a lot of stuff to get into, but
Yeah,
but it was a cool experience growing up, and we
especially
were
on
up
a ranch.
we
Yeah.
were out there horseback,
Mhm.
and doing things we probably shouldn't have been doing with our horses and swimming them through the ponds and
Yeah,
things like
having
that,
room
but
to run,
yeah,
that's what's so cool about the ranch, being as kids that I've heard so much of is that room to go run.
yeah.
You weren't raised on concrete.
No, no, and it just, it's fun to look back on things like that, and that's what, basically, built your foundation for the rest in a lot of us for our rodeo careers, and not saying that's the only way to do it, but that's the way we did it, I guess, and pretty
Well, talk
self-satisfying.
talk a little bit about, your last world title in 1995, career started slowing down, and then being able to come back again and see where rodeo had become when you start talking about the American, 2014, so almost 20 years later, getting to back into what the American has become, to what you remembered, rodeoing back then and seeing AT&T, a rodeo, the fans are just jam-packed in there, and the honor of what, I thought rodeo was able to pay a tribute to where when you backed in that box and, yeah, I was watching it on YouTube this morning and just the standing ovation of when you, threw that steer down and when just it's so cool now to see events like that, but then what it was like to get that because we talked about that drug, one of them's the camaraderie, one of them's winning, the other is when that crowd just freaking erupts, and so talk a little bit about 20 years later getting to compete at what they have now at the American.
Well, going back from 95 to 2000, I made it, 3 or 4 more times. 2000 was the last year I made the NFR, but in one of those years, I believe it was 97 or 8, I think 97, that I had elbow and shoulder surgery, and I missed the NFR. I went and hazed that year, for Brad Gleason and who won the world, and but, yeah, I was getting a little older, a little longer in the tooth, and having a harder time beating those kids, and I rodeoed a few years even after I didn't make the NFR, but it got to the point to where, my mind said I could do it, my body was kinda letting me down, and I'd got into, some other things and then had a family started and then young kids at home too and wanting to do things with them, and in 2006, I was roping a little bit more and going to some US ropings and doing some things, and I had a horse fall on me in the practice pen and tore my MCL in 2 in my knee, and I went and seen Tandy and he said, "Yeah, your MCL's gone," and I'm like, "What's that?" And he said, "Well, you keep steer wrestling, your ACL and everything else will go," and I'm like, "Well, what if I don't? What if I don't do anything?" He said, "Well, whatever you think you're tough enough to do?" And so at that time, I think I was kinda looking for an excuse to quit, and I just walked away from it. I'd, uh, I'd done that around the 4th of July, and I was still entered in a few rodeos, going to some, and I went to, Woodward, Oklahoma, Pretty Prairie, Kansas, and they were both good two-headers, and we was entered up, and I was entering the team roping with a friend of mine, Tudor Silver, and we actually placed in both rounds and won second in average at Woodward, and I placed in the steer wrestling and won the all-around, and I placed at Pretty Prairie in the bulldogging, and I'd probably won more that week than I had won all summer. And we come back through Tulsa, and the PVR was going on, and that's when I knew something was wrong with my knee, but I wasn't sure. And that's when I went and seen Tandy, and he told me that it was torn too. And he said, just whatever, I'm tough enough to do. And so I just decided right then I'm done. I needed an excuse to quit. My mind said I was still world champion quality, but my body wasn't letting me do what my mind wanted it to do. And so anyway, I literally walked away from the sport. That was in 2006, and I didn't go to a rodeo, didn't even go watch a rodeo for, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and got into doing other things, had a job selling vet supplies, got a job selling used cars, just different things to try to make a living to support my family. And I went to a PBR event in Tulsa a few years later, and Cody Lambert asked me, he said, "What would it take for you to run a steer again?" I'm like, "I'll never run a steer again. I'm done." And he said, "You wouldn't do it for $1 million?" I'm like, "Well, now you got my interest going." So that's when he told me about the American. And I had let myself go physically, and uh, I weighed. I don't know that I've ever weighed 300 in my life, but I think I was 297 or 8. I'd gotten way too heavy, and and he said, well, he told me the concept and what they were doing,
How far
and
how far
that
before the event was this when you guys were talking?
that was either in July or August at Tulsa,
Okay.
and
Then it's in March is when the American is, so
yeah, and so
6,
I
7
went
months
on
maybe.
the 1st of August. I went on a regimen of a diet and exercise, and by Halloween, by October 31st, I had lost 50 pounds, and something that I had, shouldn't have ever let myself go that long and get that big and that heavy, but unbelievable how much better you'll feel, without carrying an extra 50 pounds around. And
How much did it start feeling like, I'm sure you've watched all the Rocky movies. That was one of my favorite movies of the '80s that went on into the '90s, and, you to see those boxers that get that second chance, that third chance, and how much of that did it kind of feel like, "Man, this is only like almost like my second chance here at this," to where kind of feel your purpose or your drive coming back, to
yeah,
get ready for a huge event?
exactly. And something that motivates you like that, to where you'll get out of bed every morning and put on your jogging shoes and your sweats and go out, and, not that I was running, but I was walking a couple of miles a day. I was riding a bike. Was watching what I ate, and to give me a little more purpose, and that was all the drive behind it. And that's when also in those years, that's when Rowdy Parrott and Waggisback was staying there and living with me, and
Mhm.
I was helping
So you had
them.
some sparring partners too then, some
Yeah,
young sparring
and
partners.
yeah, and not that I just jumped back in the practice pen a lot. We were there every day with them, of course, but I thought, hey, I need to get in shape a little bit first. Go take baby steps, and then actually, so that winter, I was hauling them to the winter rodeos, and we were practicing one day in Shakota, and I was trying a horse, a hazing horse that a guy had sent up, and we was looking at horses to buy and invest in and do things. But to make a long story short, my the offside billet breaks on the saddle while I'm hazing, and of course I feel something, and I'm thinking my horse is bucking or whatever, and I was looking down at guy catching the steer, and when I looked back up, my horse's head was over here, and I'm in the saddle over here, and so we hit the ground, and my cinch breaks or whatever, and the first thing that hits is my left shoulder into the ground, and it just tears it away from
Mhm.
everything. Just so another trip back to Tandy or whatever, and it's tore away from the bone. We're gonna, and I'm like, well, I was asked to do the American, and this is January or February, I think, that we're practicing, and he says, one thing about it, you cannot make it any worse.
Mm.
He said, it's like if you go out there and hit on it again, it's not going to be any worse than it is now. It's at the point, he said, it's at the point if you think you can do it, you know, and I wanted to try and, but so we had surgery set up basically for the day after the American. It was either the day after or 2 days after, but so my practicing and stuff was pretty limited.
Limited.
I didn't get to jump a lot of steers and I did a
'Cause how
lot of
much did that hurt? Because that's your shoulder that you're hanging onto the saddle horn, balancing your weight,
right.
correct?
And
So that
yeah, and certain things, Charlie, I could pull with it. I
Mm.
could pull back with it, didn't hurt, but I could not push down at all. I
Mm.
mean, I had no strength to go down. Pulling it didn't seem to bother it. And like getting off, I could hold myself there for, not an extended period of time, but some. So it wasn't, but I couldn't push with it at all. And you need a lot more push in the steer wrestling than you do pull. So when you get down, you really need to try to place that left horn down and lift up on the right one. And all I could do was pull. And I thought, I'm going to try it. I went this far. And I did a lot of dummy work. I went and spent some time with Tom Carney at Steer Wrestling 101 and went through some drills and different things with him and bungee cords and different things just to try to get as much strength as I could and go in there, knowing that I wasn't 100%. And the first year, I got one caught to, quick enough, but I couldn't push. And anyway, the result, I just tried it and he dog fell. It didn't work, didn't make it. And so then I went and had the surgery and got the word. I don't even remember how much later, but I knew I was going to get to maybe have another chance that next year. And so that time, I kept the weight off, tried to stay in shape. In that second year, I got to practice a little bit, got to jump a few, and went in there and I'm telling you, you talk about adrenaline get to going and your mind still says you're 23 or 25, and still watching it to this day, your mind says I can still do that, and I know that. But
you can't get the winner out of a winner.
and
It's
and
just
and
that's
and
just there.
and you know, I was a tenth of a second from making it back to the top four. I think it took a 4 or 5, and I was 4 6, and I remember looking up at that clock, and I was last to go, and people was hooping,
Oh
cheering,
my gosh. Yeah, I
hollering,
remember.
and
I
because I
remember
threw
it.
one in 4 6, and I'm telling you, I was so dejected knowing that I didn't make it. I wanted to crawl in a hole and just get out of there. And everybody's, wanting to high five you and pat you on the back. And I'm like, you know, second place is the first loser, man. I'm fifth. I'm the first loser here. I didn't make it back. What are you happy for? Why are you cheering? And I'm like, I, I wanted to get back to that top four so bad because to me that was my 10th round. If I could
Yeah.
get there,
Yeah.
give
Yeah.
myself a chance, maybe one of those guys will be a little nervous. Maybe they'll back off and won't be as good. I knew if I got to that top four, man, I was going to go 100 mile an hour. I might have caught the shoot. I don't know, but I was going to be aggressive.
How much fun was it to feel that killer instinct come back again?
Hey, Team Ropers, just a quick note. My 2026 clinic schedule is available now at charlycrawford.training. You can find all up-and-coming dates and locations listed under the Clinics tab. I also have 2 open dates available for anyone interested in hosting a clinic this year, March 6th through the 8th and May 23rd through the 25th. If you'd like more information or want to apply to host, the host form is available on the website under the Clinics tab as well. Again, that's charlycrawford.training for the full clinic schedule and hosting information. For any questions, email me at charlycrawfordtraining@gmail.com.
It
Because
was,
it's not like you get that in what you were talking about when a guy goes back to work, like however many years later, like feeling that dog coming back where you're wanting to freaking kill.
yeah,
That's what that is when you're like, give me that 10th round again.
yeah.
Give me that top four because I'm gonna freaking annihilate everyone here. How cool is it to kind of have that feeling back again?
It was so cool, and that's what got me fired up about getting. I'm like, I can't believe I walked away from this sport that was so good to me when Tandy told me my MCL was torn in two. I didn't go fix it. I didn't go to a rodeo. I stayed away from it for a long time. And even hauling those boys and going back around, it wasn't like being there and in that moment. And like you said, of getting that adrenaline going and I'll tell a story back. I told you I sold used cars and trucks for a while, and I was sitting at Okmulgee, Oklahoma, in the dealership there, and Bo Clark, NFR steer wrestler, he was living over there at the time and staying and going with a guy from there, and he come by one day just to visit, and we're sitting there and uh, and we're visiting, and the first year he made the NFR, and he's asking me what to expect. And what's it like, once when you're in there, when you're back in the box at the NFR? And I'm like, "Man," I said, "y I said, "You just enjoy it. Soak up everything, as the back number ceremony, the day before, everything." But I said, "Once all that's done and you take your pictures and you throw the steers down, and once all that BS is done, and when you back in that box, just get back in your zone, get in the zone." And I said, "You'll know what to do." I said, "When you back in that box," I said, "that adrenaline and everything will kick you in." And I said, "You'll be in the zone and you'll back in there." And he looked at me and I'm like, he doesn't even know what I'm talking about. And I'm thinking that to myself. And I'm like, I can't believe this guy's made the NFR and it's not registering. And I can tell it's not, but I didn't want to, say that or discourage him or, give him any self-doubt or anything like that. But the first year or second year I made the American or whatever, I backed in there. And I mean, I have no idea there's a crowd there. I'm so focused. And
Well, yeah.
and he came up to me later and he's like, "You remember when you told me that?" He said, "I didn't have a clue what you was talking about." And he said, "I seen it today." He said, he said, I went in the box just to watch you." And he said, "I could not believe," he said, "I've never been in that state. I've never put myself in that state of mind." And he said, "You had me believing before you nodded your head you was going to win it." He said, "I looked at that," and he said, "I've never seen that in anybody." And, that confidence and that look and that, and I'm like, "Well, man, you got to put yourself there." That's,
Mhm.
that's,
That's when the
and
winners are just built different. They've found that if
yeah.
you find that dog, you find that zone, that switch, whatever it is, and yeah,
Yeah.
that's once you've learned to have it, it's like I say, I was so cool in 2015 when to me, like, I get what you're saying was when a guy don't make it back, but when you look at it, I was just so proud of the industry.
Yeah.
Because that was, our tribute to be able to freaking say, "Man, thanks for the memories." Man, just the fact that, like, the industry was so, appreciative of just the performance you made, the cowboy that you are, and the, the legacy you've left, and just it was fun. That's what has made the American where it kinda stand out a little bit different, where it gives some guys that second, third chance again
Yeah.
to get that dog back again, that freaking rush again. I loved it. We all loved it. The whole industry loved it. It was cool.
It was cool, and of course I wanted to win, but my main goal is I didn't want to look like I was a 50-year-old that, I didn't want to go out there and look like that I didn't belong. I wanted to think that I did have a chance, and I wanted,
Yeah.
not I just wanted to prove it to myself, didn't care
Mhm.
what, and and of course I kicked Luke Branquino's ass.
That had to have felt so good.
That was,
That had to feel so good.
uh,
I can only imagine the hand clap that freaking happened after that when you asked how he finished.
yeah, so a running joke deal, and now Tyler does it to me as well, wag his back because he's got 5, but when Luke win his 5th go buckle, so I wave at him, I just have to wave 4 fingers where he can wave 5 back at me, and yeah, every time they see me, they hold up their
I
5,
love
and,
it.
I
I
just have
love
to
it.
hold up 4 against them, but yeah, that's what's so cool about it, though,
Oh, yeah.
you can give each other crap, and
Mhm.
everybody's still friends in the end.
Yeah. Well, man, what a career you had, man. I enjoyed it, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate getting to sit and visit with you and talk about the career and the rodeo and just man, I tell you what, I love getting to listen to the guys when they find that zone, when they find that switch that locks in that, who knows how many young kids now are listening to this, and whether they're steer wrestlers or calf ropers or whether there's girls learning to break away or team roping you kids on here is that mentality it carries in whatever you're doing. And
It does, and no matter how you find it, but you have to find it,
you have to
and
find it.
it's kind of like your style. You can't,
Yeah.
you can't rope exactly like Speedy did or like Jake did, but hey, you can take a piece of what he did and a piece of what Jake did and a piece of what this guy did and put it together, find your own deal and rope like Charly Crawford and rope steer wrestle like Ote Berry and just find your own way.
Find your own way. I love it. Well, man, I appreciate it. I sure enjoyed it.
No problem.
Thanks
Thanks
for
for
coming
having me.
on.
You bet.
You got it, buddy. We'll be talking to you.
All right. See you, Charlie.